Welcome to the Pharma Voice Editor's Take video series, filmed live at the 2012 DIA Annual Meeting in Philadelphia. Hosted by Taryn Grome, editor of Pharma Voice. In this session, Taryn meets with Tom Avery, VP, Global Business Development, ERT.
Tom, welcome to the 2012 DIA Annual Conference and our Editor's Take video program.
Thanks very much, Taryn, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate you inviting me.
It's our pleasure. Tom, let's talk a little bit about how the landscape of clinical outcomes assessment is changing to reflect the new regulatory stance featuring ClinRo, ObsRo, and Pro. Good,
Taryn. It might help just to define ClinRo and ObsRo and Pro. Clinical reportable outcomes or clinician reportable outcomes, observer reportable outcomes, meaning the caregiver of the patient, and then finally patient reportable outcomes. And what we're seeing now is the regulatory agencies seem to be much more interested in how the patient feels rather than the biological response of the patient. Now, biomarkers, of course, will always be important, but how the patient feels needs to be measured more consistently, more accurately, and in a more standardized way. Technology is advancing to the point where it's enabling that type of consistency in understanding how the patient feels, such as a pain diary and the level of pain, or how the patient feels about their tendency to think about committing suicide. Very recently, the FDA in 2010 issued a directive saying that all drug developers need to be monitoring, most especially in the central nervous system area, they need to be monitoring the patient's tendency for suicidal thought and ideation. We have developed a technology which enables the patient to answer that question and follow-up questions in a very consistent manner, and also consistent with the way the FDA is looking for it. So that's one example of how technology is assisting the regulatory demand for these various types of health outcomes research.
That's very interesting. So talk to me about how sponsors are taking advantage of the new techniques and approaches to standardized and centralized spirometry.
Okay, now spirometry is another example of an outcome, but it's an objective outcome. The forced expiratory volume, or FEV, is a real objective endpoint. It's a measurement. And so what technology is doing now is enabling sponsors, and many sponsors have already taken advantage of this, but it's enabling sponsors to first of all measure that outcome in a very, very standardized and centralized way. FEV is not an easy outcome to collect. It's very technique dependent, a forced expiration of air. It requires coaching at the sites. And then at the back end, it requires some consistent quality control to ensure that the international standards for this endpoint are accurately assessed. If that's not done, if people do not take advantage of this technology, then what results is a lot of variability in the data and a level of rejection of the data, which can result in one of two things. The trial is going to fail, or the trial is going to require additional subjects and an extension and an addition of sites at the same time. By deploying technology in centralized spirometry, drug developers will be able to complete their trials as planned in a confident way with confident primary objectives. And finally, they'll be able to minimize the possibility of an extension of trial duration, numbers of subjects, and ultimately cost to complete the development program.
Tom, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for bringing these latest techniques and innovations to light for us.
You're very welcome, and thanks for having me.
Additional Editor's Take videos, as well as podcasts, white papers, webinars, and more, are available in the resources area at www.pharmavoice.com.